Good morning. Two very comprehensive set of discussions. The entire context being set by the governor, and then a very, very comprehensive explanation of the regulations in the previous session. So I'll actually keep it very simple, and I think I will have to keep it simple because at the end of it, if you have any questions, I'd be the most unfit person to answer those questions because I'll have the same questions as what most of you would have. In fact, instead of really going into the regulatory requirements, which all of you know, I think I will just move forward to say what is it that banks need to look at when it comes to meeting these requirements. It's just an estimate that was prepared by RBI itself, that the total additional capital requirement for the banks is about 4,95,000 crores to meet Basel III. And out of that, equity capital requirement is a little over 1.5 lakh crores, 1,50,000 crores. The assumption here, of course, is that there's a 20% growth in risk-weighted assets, and that overall the banking industry keeps earning 1% return on those assets. Again, the breakup of the capital requirement is that at least 66,000 crores of equity capital will be required just for the government banks, even if one were to assume that the government would reduce their shareholding to about 51%. Now, these numbers are, of course, just an indicator to say that the capital requirements are going to be humongous, as we move forward on Basel III. But the issue is that the story just doesn't stop here, because these are just estimates prepared at a certain point in time, after which, as we said, the goalpost has continued to move. And, it does assume, these estimates assume that there would be other forms of non-dilutive capital raising. But we don't know how much of those forms of capital can really be raised in the Indian market, because the markets have been untested so far. And of course, over and above, or even after those estimates were made, there are now additional impact on capital and on profitability, because we have additional surcharges, we have migration to advanced approaches for credit and market risk, and we have the new liquidity requirements that have been announced. And just to talk a little bit about that, we're talking of additional surcharges for the domestic systemically important banks. And this, again, I'm not getting into the table, but we know that every year there is a requirement of capital to be built in. Then we're talking of counter-cyclical capital buffers. Again, there's a table as per, what the capital requirements have to build in. But the point is to say that over and above the basic Basel III requirements, there are a huge set of other requirements that the banks will have to build in as the years come along. Additionally, I think the migration to advanced approaches, that itself actually puts in a lot of capital requirement here. And, what we've seen is actually the big point that LGDs that have been prescribed for banks in India under the foundation IRB, they are almost 50% higher, than under Basel. Restructuring is just an example. Restructuring is straight away included in definition of default. So if we just add the restructured portfolio for Indian banks, count it as default, you can just estimate the amount of capital that is required for the Indian banks just on this portfolio. Of course, the other point being that, we spoke about this a little bit earlier, that the risk weights that are assigned to specific assets are again much higher than Basel III. We look at, all the loans that are against properties, whether mortgages or otherwise, the risk weights that are assigned in India are anywhere between 50 to 100%, much higher than the 35% that is prescribed by global standards. Similarly, one could look at auto loans and the definition and the risk weights assigned there and so on. So at every point, I think it's not just Basel III, but there are additional requirements, and then there are additional Indian contexts to those additional requirements. And if we add up the capital required for all those, it's just that the amount is going to be very, very high. Again, we spoke about, capital requirement for market risk on trading portfolio. Again, the too many things that we could discuss here. the point that we mentioned earlier, that in India we do not even allow netting. So, every calculation that we have to make on gross basis. And then finally, the liquidity requirements. The LCR that has been announced, of course, saying that the Indian banks need to start by meeting up to 60% of that requirement from the next year and going up to 100% of that requirement by January 2019. But it's defined as the ratio of stock of high quality liquid assets to total net cash outflows over the next 30 days. And, we'll look at it later, but these definitions, again, the way they have been worded, I think they impose a huge requirement of maintaining a lot of liquidity on the banks, which finally means an impact on profitability and the business model as we go forward. So I think as we run banks, as we manage banks, what are the key considerations that we all need to keep in mind then as these regulations evolve and as the regulatory environment evolves? One is capital available? And if it is available, what are the fiscal implications on the bank balance sheets to be able to generate return on that capital? So again, if one were to just look at the Indian capital market, capital flows, well, there's a lot of capital flow that has happened in the Indian capital markets over the last 10 years. And not just that, out of that flow, a lot of it has gone to the Indian banking sector. So of course, we can start by saying that yes, there will be capital available for the Indian banking sector. But, after all, as capital comes into the country, we have to look at what are the economic considerations for which capital comes in. The first and the most important is that for the country, we have to have that positive macro outlook, which will continue to remain essential, and we have to give comfort on growth, but also on asset quality when it comes to the banking sector. So I think the basic underlying factor here for attracting capital would be the kind of macro outlook that we create for the country. I think that is the basic necessity. But then within that, will the capital come to the banking industry? Well, then we have to really justify investor expectations on returns in different sectors, and therefore the banking industry will have to justify the expectations of returns from the banking industry. And then within that, individual banks will have to demonstrate their specific value proposition. So under the broad macroeconomic context, how will banks justify their returns? And then within that, how will individual banks justify their business models and their asset quality? I think that's what every bank will have to look at when they look at how much capital is going to be available from the market. Of course, we can say that as the market evolves, we can all look at new instruments. And it's been clarified that approximately 27% of CET1 can be raised by banks in the form of additional tier 1 instruments, as long as the minimum CET requirements are met. But the key benefits, as I see it, of these instruments are that the cost of these instruments will be lower than the cost of equity, and that these instruments are non-dilutive in nature. But the fact of the matter is that the markets have not tried these instruments. The rating of these instruments would be different, therefore the pricing of these instruments would be different, and the investor community will be limited. The investor community for these kind of instruments will be slightly different than what we have been used to dealing with so far. So I think we'll have to build in all these considerations as we all try out these new instruments as we go along. And again, whether equity comes in or not and whether markets provide that equity or not depends on how the valuations move. Clearly, of course, if the valuations move even further from here, you could attract even more capital. But again, I've just done a rough estimate to say how much will the markets contribute, how much will, especially for the public sector banks, they will have to rely on the government to provide capital. If I go even by the base capital requirement, the numbers that I initially talked about, to which we have not yet added the additional capital requirements, if you go by the current price to book and you assume that the minimum shareholding or the shareholding in the public sector banks of the government could be about 51%, Still, the markets could provide only 40 to 45% of the capital, and the government will have to infuse more than 55% of the capital. Well, if one assumes very, very high price to book ratios, the kinds that we have reached in peak years in the last 5 years, one could assume that the market could provide a lot of the capital, and the reliance on the government would come down. But clearly, as I said, these are all conjectures depending on how markets would move, how our macro outlook will move, and therefore how valuations will move. Therefore, coming back to saying that, while there will be capital and, we'll all have to figure ways of attracting capital, but the basics come down to, are looking at the profitability within the bank and continuing to focus on improving returns within the bank, because that is the key consideration for attracting capital. Now, why is focus on improvement in profitability essential? I think there are 3 reasons why we'll have to keep focusing more and more on profitability. First of all, there are going to be more pressures on return on assets itself. For example, when we talk of the regulatory developments on liquidity, that is clearly going to bring down the current return on assets itself. So, we have to use other levers to continue to just maintain ROA, not just improve ROA. The second point is that even maintaining ROA is not enough, because if you have to maintain return on equity, and if the requirement of equity keeps going up, then actually just the mathematics suggests that we have to actually increase ROA just to be able to maintain return on equity. So I think, again, therefore, the issue is that the more we generate capital internally through profitability, the less would be the requirement to rely on outside sources of capital. So, if we look at a 10 basis points improvement in return on assets, it can result into an internal capital generation of about 25,000 crores, but over 5 years for the banking industry. So, the issue is that we have to constantly, first of all, look at how do we maintain return on assets, given that these regulations are going to create impact on profitability itself. Second is, how do we actually maintain return on equity, given that the capital requirements are going up? And thirdly, with all that, how much capital can keep coming into the banks if the return on equity keeps remaining under pressure? So profitability improvement is really the key to achieving earnings, growth in an environment of higher capital requirements. But, again, what are the key levers for profitability? I think these are very simple, not just that each and every line item of profits or the P&L statement is going to be important, but really how do we run our businesses is going to be important. Capital allocation is really therefore going to become a more and more important point for everybody to consider, for every bank to consider as we steer our banks in the future, because we will have to prioritize growth in more profitable segments to maximize the return on capital. But again, we must remember that in India, part of the capital allocation is non-discretionary. All the directed lending that we have to do gives us less leeway in terms of how to allocate capital in profitable areas. So we have that additional constraint as well, and therefore less room to maneuver as we look at capital allocations within our respective banks. Clearly, the next lever could be, do we improve and how do we improve pricing for credit? Again, I think actually here in India, we do have a lot of scope because there's a lot of alignment of pricing to risk profile that we can all achieve. There is, as I said, the way credit is priced in India, I think there's a lot of improvement that we can all achieve. But again, the issue is that in an environment where the credit growth is muted, the competitive factors play a more important role when it comes to pricing decisions than the actual deserved pricing. And therefore, as we run banks, how do we arrive at that balance of deserved pricing vis-a-vis the pricing that is driven by competitive forces? But price loans for a minimum return on capital deployed is, I think, the way we'll have to look at as we take our credit decisions going forward. And then finally, of course, look at operational efficiency. So look at every item of investment in the bank, whether it's branches, whether it's physical infrastructure, whether it's employees, whether it's capital, of course, and to say how do we keep improving productivity from all the investment that we have in the bank, and thereby reduce cost ratios and thereby try and improve profitability. I think as we, of course, look at, our banks internally and look at the business model and improve profitability, I think overall, all of us should keep in mind that when we look at these regulations, we have to put the Indian context in perspective. In a way, this got touched upon, in the last two sessions. But clearly, what I would say is that our regulation has always kept pace with global standards, and we've had in the regulatory context a proven reputation of being conservative and having the regulatory foresight, and that's actually served well for the Indian banking industry and the Indian economy. But I think as we look forward, we have to keep in mind that India has certain specific requirements, and we should keep them in mind as we work the regulations out. So what is the first specific requirement? I think, when we talk of capital requirements of domestically important, systemically important institutions, what we have to keep in mind is that Indian banks are still very small in the global context, and also that Indian banks are still small in the, even given the context of India's GDP. So, when we look at top 4 Indian banks, the aggregate of top 4 Indian banks is still less than 25% of the 4th largest Chinese bank. So, where are we? We add the assets of the top 4 Indian banks. We are still, much less than the 4th largest, bank in China. So, we are still a very, a nation of very, very small banks. And therefore, I think the systemic concentration is low, because most banks have single-digit market shares. Most banks are again very small, even in the context of India's GDP. So, when we look at what happened globally and, how banks created an issue for their respective economies, we have to remember that at that time we had banks which were much larger than the GDP of their respective country itself. So, we had UBS, where if you added the size of UBS, it was more than 1.5 times the Swiss economy, and so on. But today, if you look at even SBI, it's just 15% of India's GDP. You look at the top 4 Indian banks, that's 30% of India's GDP. So when we talk of imposing, capital requirements for those institutions that can create systemic issues, we have to remember that, given the size and the scale of Indian banks, the extent of systemic issues also would not be as large, and we should keep that in mind. Again, the second point that I can talk about when we talk about the Indian context is that the requirements of emerging countries like India are very different from the requirements of developed economies who have already invested in their infrastructure and invested in creating their growth models. As we look at India, first of all, India is a very underpenetrated credit market as yet compared to the other countries. So when we are applying global standards, we must remember that we are comparing countries where the private credit to GDP is 184% to India, where the private credit to GDP is 51%. But over and above that, I think what we also have to remember is that India's growth will be credit intensive in nature for a few decades to come, because India still has to invest in infrastructure. I mean, we're talking of, we're saying that our 2 growth drivers are our demographics and our ability and requirement to invest. Well, even demographics, we've seen that Indians can borrow more because they're borrowing on the basis of their earning capability. And as we add more and more people in the earning age group, we are adding to them, the consumption power as well as the ability to create assets, and therefore they would need funding to create assets. But over and above that, when we look at the economy, whether we talk of investing in core sectors, whether we talk of investing in infrastructure, India's growth is going to be credit intensive. So we have to keep that in mind when we look at the counter-cyclical capital buffers and when we look at global standards of credit to GDP. Similarly, when we talk of the high liquidity requirements, we've all seen that the LCRs that have been announced, SLR other than excess SLR is actually excluded from computation. We just discussed that. Then wholesale term deposits. Of course, all withdrawable prematurely have been excluded, and therefore this results in a very high liquidity requirements to comply with LCR. But the issue is, again, in India, we cannot even offer differential pricing for those deposits that can be withdrawn prematurely and those that cannot be withdrawn prematurely. So while we have regulations, we do not have levers then to structure, this side of the balance sheet in order to be able to create business models. If we think that we do not want to put a lot of liquidity buffers, we cannot really change the, at least the context or the structure of the liabilities to a large extent. So therefore, holding additional liquidity will entail costs. Now, if we are talking of a large requirement in the form of statutory liquidity ratio, either we should consider that is a liquid instrument in that sense. Of course, there's a regulatory requirement, and but market-wise, that's a liquid instrument. Or do we move the regulations in the country simultaneously to say that if the banks are going to build up that much of liquidity buffer, then the requirement, the regulatory requirement in the form of minimum SLR itself can go down. So, we have to look at the regulations in that context, but having a double whammy of keeping the SLR almost where it is and then additionally asking for LCR will only mean that there would be more impact on profitability. So exclusion of the highly liquid assets carried by Indian banks will actually therefore restrict availability of funds for lending. See, one is the impact on profitability, but bigger than that is the impact on our ability to lend and therefore actually money available to lend. So growth constraints for banks, and if the banks don't lend, I think there could be macroeconomic implications, and this is what we need to keep in mind as we look at the Indian context. So I think I would just summarize to say that capital requirements are large and they are growing. As we said, the goalpost here keeps changing, and the estimates of capital requirements are just growing for the banks. Well, capital is available, for the Indian banks. Capital has been available so far, but we must remember that capital is not finite. What we need, of course, over and above the banking sector, the positive macro economic environment to attract capital for the system, but that's really for the system. As far as the banks are concerned, individual banks will have to focus on improving profitability. And we'll all have to focus on improving our risk-adjusted returns so that we can balance earnings growth and the capital requirement. And, macroeconomic impact for India of the evolving requirements will continue, will have to be watched, and we should keep that in mind as we develop the regulations and our respective business models. Thank you.